I'm Janice, 31 female. I live in a small but cozy apartment filled with the scent of old books and brewing tea, a quiet sanctuary that I've built for myself. By day, I'm an archivist at the city's historical society, where I find peace in preserving the stories of the past. My life, for the first time, feels stable, calm, and full of promise, largely thanks to my fiancé, Mark. But the past I so carefully catalog for others has a way of haunting my own life. And I was about to discover that the person I should have been able to trust the most was determined to unearth my most painful secrets and destroy everything I had built. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life with Mark felt like the deep, satisfying breath you take after years of holding it in. At 33, he was a financial advisor, a man who dealt in futures and securities, and with me, he was security personified. His love was not a volatile stock. It was a long-term bond, steady and reliable. We met 2 years ago at a local charity auction where I was volunteering, and he was, in his words, trying to look like a good guy for a potential client. He ended up bidding an absurd amount on a box of historical maps I had curated, and when he came to collect his prize, he asked for my number instead. Our relationship was built on a foundation of quiet understanding. He loved my passion for history, and I loved his calm, methodical approach to life. He was the anchor to my sometimes drifting ship. My past was something I carried with a quiet, persistent weight. During my late teens and early 20s, I'd battled a severe eating disorder. It was a dark, isolating period of my life, a storm that had reshaped my internal landscape. It took years of therapy, nutritional counseling, and sheer force of will to find my way back to a healthy relationship with food and, more importantly, with myself. I didn't hide it, but I didn't advertise it either. It was a part of my story, a chapter I had closed, and I only shared it with people who had earned the deepest level of my trust. Mark was one of those people. I told him about 6 months into our relationship, my voice trembling as I laid bare the scars I thought made me unlovable. He listened without judgment, held my hand, and simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with that piece of you. It doesn't change anything, except that I admire your strength even more." His reaction was the final seal on my heart. I knew then that he was the one. My sister, Laura, was a different story. At 34, she was 3 years my senior and operated with the breezy, aggressive confidence of a successful real estate agent. She lived in a world of open houses, sharp suits, and closing deals. Growing up, our dynamic was always complicated. She was the star, the easygoing, popular one, while I was the quiet, introspective bookworm. Our mother, Diane, a retired teacher, often tried to bridge the gap between us, encouraging a closeness that never quite materialized. Laura's support during my illness had been conditional, often wrapped in backhanded compliments or public displays of concern that felt more for her benefit than mine. "Look how brave Janice is being," she'd say at family gatherings, pulling me into a tight hug that felt more like a vice. "It's so hard, but we're all here for her." Her support always felt like a performance, casting her in the role of the devoted, long-suffering sister. When Mark and I announced our engagement, the reactions were predictable. My mom cried tears of joy. Mark's family was thrilled. Laura, however, offered a smile that was just a little too wide, her eyes scanning Mark as if she were assessing a property's market value. "Mark, welcome to the family," she'd boomed, pulling him into one of her signature suffocating hugs. "You'll have your hands full with this one, but don't worry, I'll give you the survival guide." We all laughed, but her words landed with a familiar thud in my stomach. She was positioning herself as the keeper of my secrets, the expert on my fragility. The wedding planning began in earnest, a whirlwind of venue tour, cake tastings, and dress fittings. Mark was an equal partner in everything, his spreadsheet-loving brain making the process far less stressful than I'd imagined. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony at a historic in upstate, a place that felt like us. Laura insisted on being my maid of honor. "Obviously, it has to be me," she declared over brunch, not even phrasing it as a question. "Who else knows you better?" I agreed, mostly to keep the peace and to appease my mother, who saw this as a beautiful opportunity for us to finally bond like real sisters. I tried to be optimistic. I told myself that this was a new chapter for everyone. Maybe marriage, this solid, happy Miles tone, would finally be the thing that reset our relationship. Maybe she would finally see me as an equal, a woman building a life, not a project she needed to manage or a problem she needed to solve. I wanted, so desperately, for that to be true. The invitations were sent, the deposits were paid, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt bright and unburdened. The slate, I believed, was finally clean. I had no idea she was waiting for the perfect moment to shatter it. The first tremor of trouble came, as it often did with Laura, disguised as affection. It was a Tuesday evening, about 2 months before the wedding. I was at home, happily cataloging a new collection of 19th-century letters for the Historical Society, when Mark walked in. He looked off. Not upset, but thoughtful, his brow furrowed in a way that usually meant he was wrestling with a complex financial projection. He kissed me, a little more deliberately than usual, and then sat on the edge of my desk, watching me work for a moment. "How was your day?" I asked, setting aside a fragile, sepia-toned envelope. "It was fine," he said, his voice quiet. "I had lunch with your sister." My hand stilled. Oh, that's unexpected. Laura and Mark were friendly, but they didn't exactly move in the same circles. A one-on-one lunch was a new development. "Yeah," he continued, picking up a vintage paperweight from my desk. "She wanted to, talk about the wedding. And you?" A knot of anxiety, cold and familiar, began to form in my stomach. I knew Laura's talks. They were never just talks, they were strategic maneuvers designed to position her at the center of any situation. "What about me?" I tried to keep my voice light, casual. Mark took a deep breath. "Janice, she told me about your past, your struggles with your eating disorder." The room suddenly felt very cold, the air thinned. It wasn't that he knew, he already knew. I had told him myself in my own time with my own words. It was that she had told him. She had taken my story, the most vulnerable piece of my history, and had handed it to him like a piece of gossip over a salad. She framed it as a friendly warning, Mark said, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a gentle concern that only made the violation feel sharper. "She said she felt it was her duty as your big sister to make sure I knew what I was getting into. She said you tend to downplay how serious it was, and that I needed to be prepared for relapses, especially with the stress of the wedding." The shame was instantaneous and paralyzing. It was a physical sensation, a hot wave that washed over my skin and settled like lead in my gut. In that moment, I wasn't a 31-year-old woman in a happy, stable relationship. I was 19 again, fragile and broken, being defined by my weakest moments. Laura had reached back in time, plucked out my deepest insecurity, and paraded it in front of the one person whose opinion of me mattered most. She hadn't just shared a secret, she had reframed my narrative. I had presented my past to Mark as a story of strength and recovery. She had presented it as a cautionary tale, a ticking time bomb. She was painting me as damaged goods, a fragile thing that required special handling. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark's expression hardened slightly. "I told her that you had already trusted me with your story, and that I was in awe of the woman you are today because of, and not in spite of, your past." Relief washed over me, a fragile tide against the burning shore of my humiliation. He believed in me, he trusted me, but the damage was done. The act itself was the wound. "She said she was just looking out for us," Mark added, shaking his head. "That she just wants us both to be happy and prepared." That was Laura's genius. Her malice was always wrapped in the language of love. Her sabotage was always framed as support. She could deliver the most devastating blow and then stand back, hands held up in a gesture of pure innocence, leaving you to feel guilty for even questioning her motives. "I'm so sorry, Mark," I managed to say, the words thick with shame. "I'm sorry she put you in that position." He moved from the desk and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. They were trembling. "Hey," he said softly, his voice firm. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. This is on her, not you. I just wanted to tell you because I will never, ever keep something like that from you. We're a team." I nodded, unable to speak, as tears welled in my eyes. He held me, and for a few minutes I let his strength be mine. But even in the safety of his arms, the violation echoed. She had crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. This wasn't a thoughtless comment or a clumsy attempt at bonding. It was a calculated move. She was testing the foundation of our relationship, planting seeds of doubt in Mark's mind. She was reminding me that no matter how far I'd come, she would always hold the key to my past, and she wasn't afraid to use it. That night, sleep offered no escape. I tossed and turned, replaying the imagined conversation in my head, hearing Laura's bright, cheerful voice delivering her friendly warning. The slate I thought was so clean was now covered in her fingerprints. The trust I had in her, already so thin, had finally, irrevocably, been broken. The days following Mark's revelation were shrouded in a thick fog of anger and shame. I went through the motions of work and wedding planning, but my mind was a constant loop of Laura's betrayal. I avoided her calls, responding to her cheerful texts about floral arrangements and bridesmaid dresses with curt, one-word answers. I knew I had to confront her, but the thought of it made me feel physically ill. How do you confront someone who will expertly twist your pain into an accusation of you being overly sensitive? How do you fight an enemy who insists they are your greatest ally? My mother, Diane, could sense the tension. "Is everything all right with you and Laura?" she asked over the phone. "She said you've been a bit distant." "Just busy with the wedding, Mom," I lied, the words tasting like ash. In our family, rocking the boat was the greatest sin, and Laura had always been the captain. The breaking point, the thing that turned my simmering anger into cold, hard resolve, came a week later. I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, an obligatory ritual I was dreading. Laura was there, of course, holding court at the dinner table, telling a story about a difficult client. She was radiant, confident, and completely oblivious, or so she pretended, to the chasm that had opened between us. I was quiet, pushing food around my plate, feeling the ghost of my old anxieties creeping at the edges of my mind. After dinner, Mark offered to help my dad with the dishes, and my mom went to answer a phone call, leaving me alone with Laura in the living room. "Okay, what's going on with you?" she asked, her tone shifting from performative cheer to sharp impatience. "You've been weird all week." "I know you had lunch with Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I know what you said to him." Laura's expression didn't flicker. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I told you I was going to. I was just being a good sister, Janice. He's a great guy, and I wanted to make sure he understood how to support you. You get stressed. You have a history. It's not a big deal." "It was my story to manage, Laura," I shot back, my voice rising. "Not yours to use as a weapon." "A weapon? Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "You're twisting this into something it's not. I was helping." The conversation went around in these infuriating circles, her gaslighting so practiced and smooth that I started to question my own reality. I left my parents' house that evening feeling defeated, shaken, and more alone than ever. I felt like I was screaming into a void. When I got back to my apartment, Mark was waiting for me. He saw the look on my face and immediately wrapped me in his arms. "It didn't go well, did it?" he asked softly. I just shook my head, fresh tears of frustration spilling over. "She's never going to admit it," I choked out. "She'll never see that what she did was wrong." Mark held me for a long moment, then he said, "I think there's something else you need to see." He pulled out his phone, his expression grim. "After our lunch, she texted me. I didn't tell you at first because you were already so hurt, and I didn't want to pour gasoline on the fire. But after seeing you tonight, I think you need to know the whole truth." He opened his messages and handed me the phone. My heart pounded against my ribs as I started to read. The screen glowed with her words, a string of texts sent in the hours after her friendly warning. "Laura, hey Mark. Was so great to finally have a proper chat. I just worry about her, you know." "Mark, it was good to talk, Laura. But as I said, Janice has already been very open with me about her past. We're in a very good place." "Laura, I know, but open is one thing, living with it is another. The stress of the wedding is a huge trigger. If she starts acting distant or controlling with food, please don't take it personally. Just call me. I know how to handle her when she gets like this." My breath hitched. Handle me? The phrase was so condescending, so clinical. It was the language one used for a misbehaving pet or a faulty appliance. Laura, seriously. It can get ugly, I've seen it. I can help you manage the situation so it doesn't spiral. Think of me as your secret weapon. We both just want what's best for Janice. Mark, I appreciate the offer, but I'm confident that Janice and I can handle anything together. We communicate very well. Laura, of course you do. She's amazing. I just want to be a resource for you. The last thing any of us wants is for her to end up back where she was. Just keep my number handy. It's our little insurance policy. I read the messages again, and then a third time. The cruelty, the sheer, calculated manipulation of it all, was laid bare in black and white. This wasn't concern. This wasn't a sister trying to help. This was a power play of the highest order. She hadn't just tried to poison Mark's perception of me. She was trying to insert herself into the very fabric of our marriage before it had even begun. She was positioning herself as the intermediary, the puppet master, the one person who held the manual to my broken parts. The winking emoji at the end was the final, sickening flourish. It was a conspiratorial little gesture that stripped away any pretense of good intentions. This was a game to her. My life, my deepest pain, my future marriage, it was all just a game. The shame I had felt before was burned away by a white-hot rage. The fog of confusion lifted, replaced by a terrible, stunning clarity. She wasn't just my sister, she was my saboteur, and I finally had the proof. Holding Mark's phone, seeing Laura's words typed out so casually, was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving. Suddenly, a lifetime of small hurts, confusing moments, and inexplicable setbacks began to click into place. Her text messages weren't an isolated incident. They were a Rosetta Stone that helped me translate years of her behavior. The insurance policy she offered Mark wasn't a new idea. It was just the latest version of a role she had been playing my entire life. My rage gave way to a chilling sense of purpose. I needed to understand. I needed to know how deep the rot went. Mark saw the shift in my eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm thinking this isn't the first time she's done something like this," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I just didn't have proof before. So I started digging. It felt strange at first, like being a detective in my own life. I began with my memories, re-examining them through this new lens of deliberate sabotage. I remembered applying for a highly competitive internship at a museum in another state during my senior year of college. It was my dream job. I had made it to the final round of interviews, and I felt confident. Then, a week before the final decision, my anxiety, which had been manageable, suddenly spiked. I was plagued by self-doubt and panic attacks. I remembered Laura calling me almost daily during that week. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of pressure, Janice?" She'd ask, her voice dripping with concern. "It's so far from home. What if you have a setback and Mom and I can't get to you? Maybe you should consider something closer, something less stressful for now." At the time, I thought she was being a caring, if overprotective, sister. I ended up self-destructing in the final interview, a stammering, nervous wreck. I didn't get the job. Now I saw her concern for what it was, a targeted campaign to undermine my confidence at the most critical moment. The more I thought, the more examples surfaced. There was the time I was dating a guy named Ben in my mid-20s. He was kind, creative, and we were getting serious. Laura had met him a few times and always seemed to love him. Then one day, he grew distant. He broke up with me a week later, saying he felt I was in a fragile place and he didn't think he was equipped to handle it. He wouldn't elaborate. I was devastated and confused. At the time, Laura had been my shoulder to cry on. "He's an idiot," she'd said, hugging me. "He clearly couldn't handle a strong, complex woman like you. You're better off." Now, I felt a sickening certainty that she had staged her own friendly warning with him, too. These were just feelings, old memories filtered through a new understanding. I needed something more concrete. My investigation turned to old emails and messages. I spent a weekend combing through my digital archives, searching for keywords, for Laura's name, for any evidence that would support this horrifying new theory. In a forgotten folder in my email, I found an exchange from 7 years ago. It was between me, Laura, and our mother, Diane. We were planning a trip to celebrate my mom's birthday. I had suggested a quiet weekend at a cabin in the mountains, a place where we could hike and relax. The email chain showed me enthusiastically planning the details. Then, there was an email from Laura, sent only to my mother. It must have been a misclick, a reply that was meant to be a private forward. Subject: Ray, Mom's birthday weekend. Mom, I got your email. I think the cabin is a terrible idea for Janice right now. You know how she gets when she's out of her routine. All that unstructured time is really bad for her. And the focus on outdoorsy stuff and hiking, it puts too much pressure on her body image. I'm really worried it could trigger a relapse. Let me handle it, I'll suggest. A spa weekend in the city instead. It's more controlled, and I can keep an eye on her. Don't mention I said this, I don't want her to feel managed. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut. She had painted my simple suggestion as a threat to my mental health. She had used my history as a tool to control the situation, to veto my idea, and to recenter the entire event around her. We ended up going to the spa weekend she suggested. I had felt railroaded at the time, but I went along with it to make my mom happy. I never knew she had been manipulating our mother behind my back, using her love and concern for me as a weapon against my own autonomy. Mark was my silent partner in this painful excavation. He sat with me as I pieced together the fragments, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of my resurfacing past. It all makes sense now, I whispered, looking up from my laptop screen, my eyes burning with unshed tears. All those times I felt like I failed, or wasn't strong enough, or that people left for no reason, she was always there in the background, whispering in their ear. She wasn't protecting me. She was curating my life to keep me small, to keep me beneath her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just nodded, his expression a mixture of anger on my behalf and profound sadness. So what do we do now? He asked. The question hung in the air. For a moment, I considered the easiest path: elope. Run away from the whole mess, cut Laura out of my life, and never look back. But that felt like letting her win. It felt like I would be confirming her narrative, that I was the fragile one, the one who couldn't handle stress. No, she had spent years sabotaging my life from the shadows. She had tried to poison the best thing that had ever happened to me. She didn't deserve to slink away into the darkness. She deserved to be exposed in the light. We do nothing, I said, a cold, clear plan beginning to form in my mind. We let her think she's won. We let her be the maid of honor. We let her walk right into the trap. Mark looked at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. What trap? I took a deep breath. The one I'm about to build. The weeks leading up to the wedding became a surreal performance. On the outside, I was the blushing, slightly stressed bride-to-be, and Laura was the doting, hyper-competent maid of honor. On the inside, I was a general preparing for battle. Every phone call, every text, every meeting with her was part of a carefully constructed facade. I played my part to perfection. I leaned on her for advice about caterers. I laughed at her jokes during my bridal shower. I let her manage situations that didn't need managing. With each interaction, I gave her more rope, letting her believe her position as my handler was not only accepted, but appreciated. Mark was my co-conspirator, a role he played with quiet brilliance. He would occasionally mention to Laura in passing how right she was about the wedding stress, and how grateful he was that she was there to help Janice stay on track. Her ego swelled with every bit of false validation we fed her. She was confident, smug, and completely unaware that the ground beneath her was about to give way. My plan wasn't about a screaming match or a dramatic, tear-filled confrontation. That's what she would expect, and she would be prepared for it. She would twist my words, paint me as hysterical, and once again cast herself as the victim of my instability. No, my revenge had to be as calculated and precise as her sabotage had been. It had to be undeniable, public, and delivered in a way that would leave her with absolutely no room to maneuver. It had to be a moment of pure, unassailable truth. The perfect venue for this revelation, I decided, was the rehearsal dinner. It was the ideal setting, an intimate gathering of our closest family and friends, the people whose opinions mattered most. It was a captive audience of everyone she had ever lied to about me. My mother would be there, as would our closest aunts, uncles, and my childhood friends, all people who had, at one point or another, been subjected to Laura's carefully crafted narrative of my fragility. The first step of the plan was to gather the evidence into a compelling format. I took screenshots of the text exchange between Laura and Mark. I scanned the old email where she had manipulated my mother. I wrote down the memories, the failed internship, the breakup with Ben, with as much detail as I could recall. I then began to discreetly reach out to a few trusted people from my past. I called my college roommate, Sarah, and asked her if she remembered that terrible internship interview. "Remember it," Sarah said. "Janice, you were a wreck. You told me your sister had called you every day that week telling you that you weren't ready. I told you then that she was messing with your head." Her validation was another steel bar in the foundation of my case. The most difficult call was to Ben. It took me a week to work up the courage. When I finally reached him, I kept it simple. "Ben," I said, my heart pounding, "I know this is out of the blue, but I need to ask you something about why we broke up. Did my sister Laura ever speak to you about me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Janice," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Yeah, she did. She told me she was worried about you, that you were in a really bad place with your old eating issues, and that getting serious with me was putting you under a pressure that could cause a relapse. She made it sound like I would be doing you a favor by backing off." The confession sent a wave of cold fury through me, but I kept my voice even. "Thank you for telling me, Ben. That's all I needed to know." I compiled everything into a single, devastating narrative. My work as an archivist had prepared me for this. I was curating the secret history of Laura's betrayal. The centerpiece of my plan, however, was the maid of honor's toast. It was traditional for the maid of honor to give a speech at the rehearsal dinner. I knew Laura's speech would be a masterpiece of passive aggression. It would be filled with veiled references to my struggles, painting her as my savior, my rock. She would praise my strength while simultaneously reminding everyone of my weakness, and I was going to let her. In fact, I was going to encourage it. A week before the wedding, I called her. "Lore," I said, infusing my voice with a touch of vulnerability. "I've been thinking about your speech. I just want to say, don't be afraid to mention the hard times. Our story isn't perfect, and I think it's important for people to know how much you were there for me. It's a testament to our bond." I could almost hear her preening through the phone. "Of course, Jan," she said, her voice oozing with false sincerity. "Don't you worry. I'll make sure everyone knows how far you've come and how much we've been through together." She had taken the bait. I was not just letting her walk into the trap, I was helping her build it. The final piece was Mark. I wanted him to have an out. "Are you absolutely sure you're okay with this?" I asked him the night before the rehearsal dinner. "This is going to be messy. It could blow up our entire family." Mark took my face in his hands. "Your sister tried to undermine our marriage before it even started. She used your deepest pain to try and control you and manipulate me. There is no our family if it includes that. I'm with you 100%. We are doing this together." We spent the rest of the evening preparing. I printed copies of the texts and the email. I created a small, elegant slideshow with just a few key phrases and dates, which I loaded onto a USB drive. I arranged with the venue coordinator to have a projector and screen set up, telling them it was for a surprise slideshow for the bride and groom. Everything was in place. The stage was set. Laura was about to give the performance of her life, and I was about to give her the ending she so richly deserved. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private room at a beautiful old restaurant, all dark wood and soft lighting. The long table was filled with the 30 people we loved most in the world. Laughter and conversation filled the air, but for me, everything felt muted, hyper-focused, like the moments before a storm. I sat next to Mark, his hand a warm, steady presence on my leg under the table. Across from us, Laura was holding court, resplendent in a silk dress, soaking in the attention. She caught my eye and gave me a wide, conspiratorial smile, as if to say, "See, I've got this." I smiled back, a calm, serene expression I had practiced in the mirror. After the main course, my father stood and gave a beautiful, heartfelt toast. Then Mark's best man told a few funny stories. And then it was Laura's turn. She stood up, champagne flute in hand, a picture of poise and sisterly devotion. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Janice's big sister, Laura," she began, her voice smooth and confident. The room fell silent. I have watched Janice grow into the incredible woman she is today, and I couldn't be prouder. But our journey hasn't always been easy. Here it comes, I thought. There were times when Janice faced some very deep, personal struggles. She glanced at me with a look of profound, theatrical sympathy. Dark times where she needed someone to be her anchor, her protector, and I was so honored to be that person for her. She went on for another minute, weaving a tale of her unwavering support. She spoke of late-night phone calls and tough love, of being the rock that helped me through my health challenges. She was painting herself as a saint, a martyr to my weakness. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin. A few of my aunts were looking at me with pity. Laura was cementing her narrative in front of everyone. "And seeing you now, Janice, so happy and healthy, out to marry a wonderful man like Mark, it makes every single difficult moment worth it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mark," she said, turning to him, "I know you'll take care of her, but if you ever need backup," she added with a light, tinkling laugh, "you know who to call." She raised her glass. "To my sister, Janice, a true survivor, I love you." The room erupted in applause. People were touched. A few were crying. Laura sat down, looking pleased with herself, her duty done. I let the applause die down. Then I stood up, tapping my own glass with a spoon. "Thank you, Laura," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the warm, sentimental atmosphere. That was a beautiful speech, and it brings me to a little surprise I wanted to share with all of you. I gave a small nod to the venue coordinator at the back of the room. The lights dimmed slightly, and the projector screen hummed to life. A confused murmur went through the room. Laura looked at me, her smile faltering. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was plain white text on a black background. It read, "A friendly warning." "Laura is right about one thing," I began, my voice amplified by the room's sudden silence. "We have been through a lot together, and she has always been very involved in my life. In fact, she's been so involved, she recently took it upon herself to have a private lunch with my fiancé, Mark, to warn him about what he was getting into by marrying me." I saw my mother's head snap towards Laura, whose face had gone pale. I clicked the remote. The next slide showed the screenshot of Laura's first text to Mark. "I just worry about her, you know. The stress of the wedding is a huge trigger." Laura shared the most painful parts of my past with Mark. I continued, my gaze locked on my sister. A past I had already shared with him myself. She framed it as a warning, as her duty. But it didn't stop there. I clicked again. The next texts appeared on the screen. "If she starts acting distant, please don't take it personally. Just call me. I know how to handle her when she gets like this." A collective gasp went through the room. People were leaning forward, reading the words on the screen. Laura looked like she had been turned to stone. "Handle me," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "An interesting choice of words for a supportive sister, don't you think?" I clicked again. The final, damning text appeared. "Think of me as your secret weapon. It's our little insurance policy." The winking emoji seemed to mock the entire room. I could feel the atmosphere shift from confused sentimentality to shocked horror. "An insurance policy," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "It turns out Laura has been my secret weapon for years." I then briefly, calmly, recounted the story of the internship and the breakup with Ben, whose permission I'd got to share the story. I mentioned the email she'd sent to my mother, sabotaging a family trip. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I presented the facts, the evidence of a long and calculated campaign of sabotage, all carried out under the guise of love. "You see," I concluded, turning my full attention back to Laura, "my biggest struggle wasn't my health. It was having a sister who needed me to be sick so she could feel healthy, who needed me to be weak so she could feel strong, who systematically undermined my confidence and my relationships to keep me in a box that she could control." I picked up my champagne flute. "So I'd like to propose a toast of my own, not to a maid of honor, because that position is now vacant." I looked around the room at the stunned faces of my family and friends, but a toast to the truth, because it's the truth that will allow me to start my marriage to Mark with a clean slate, a real one this time. I looked directly at Laura, whose face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "And a toast to you, Laura. May you finally find something in your own life to handle, so you can leave mine alone." I drank my champagne and sat down. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. Every eye was on Laura. There was nowhere for her to run, nowhere to hide. The truth was on the screen, in the air, and on the faces of everyone she had ever tried to fool. Her performance was over. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was broken by Laura pushing her chair back violently, the sound of wood scraping against the floor echoing like a gunshot. Her face was a mottled mess of crimson and white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could she say? The proof was literally projected on the wall behind her. She shot a look of pure venom at me, then at Mark, and then at our mother, whose face was a canvas of shock and dawning comprehension. Without a word, Laura grabbed her purse and practically fled the room, leaving a stunned audience in her wake. The moment the door slammed shut behind her, the room erupted in a low hum of hushed, frantic conversations. My dad came over immediately and put a hand on my shoulder, his expression a mixture of anger and deep sorrow. "Janice, I had no idea," he whispered. My mother, Diane, looked utterly devastated. She came over to my side, her eyes filled with tears. "That email, I thought she was just being overprotective. Oh, Janice, I'm so sorry, I should have seen it." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, and I meant it. "She manipulated you too. She used your love for me against both of us." Mark wrapped his arm around my waist, a solid, grounding presence. His parents came over and gave me a hug, his mother whispering, "You are an incredibly strong woman." The rest of the rehearsal dinner was a surreal affair. The initial shock slowly gave way to an outpouring of support for me. My friends, my cousins, my aunts, they all came to me, not with pity but with respect. Sarah, my college roommate, just looked at me and said, "Finally, I'm so proud of you." It turned out that many of them had harbored small doubts about Laura's behavior over the years, moments where her concern felt more like control, but they had dismissed it just as I had. My presentation hadn't just exposed Laura. It had validated the gut feelings of everyone in that room. The wedding the next day was perfect. It was perfect because she wasn't there. We didn't have a maid of honor. When the officiant came to the part where the maid of honor would traditionally hold the bride's bouquet, my mother quietly stood up and took it from me, giving my hand a squeeze that said everything. There was no drama, no tension, no one watching me with a critical eye, waiting for me to crack under the pressure. There was only joy, love, and a profound sense of peace. The absence of her presence was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. Standing there, saying my vows to Mark, I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The weight of her judgment, a burden I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there, was finally gone. In the weeks and months that followed, the fallout settled. Laura predictably attempted to spin the narrative. She sent a long, rambling email to the entire family, accusing me of being a cruel, unstable liar who had twisted her words and staged a public ambush to humiliate her. But it was too late. The proof was undeniable. No one bought it. She had lost her audience. She became a pariah in our family, her calls going unanswered, her attempts to rally support met with stony silence. She had built her identity on being the capable, caring sister, and I had dismantled it with a single, undeniable truth. My relationship with my mother healed and deepened. We had honest conversations for the first time, acknowledging the dysfunctional dynamic that had ruled our family for decades. She apologized for her part in enabling Laura, for prioritizing a false peace over my well-being. I forgave her, because I understood she was a victim of Laura's manipulation, too. My marriage to Mark flourished in the open air of honesty and trust. There were no secrets between us, no handlers or insurance policies. We built our life on a foundation of mutual respect. His unwavering support through the entire ordeal was the ultimate proof of his character. He never once doubted me, never once suggested I take the easier path. He stood by my side as I fought my battle, and for that, I will be forever grateful. I no longer speak to my sister. Cutting her out of my life was not an act of revenge, it was an act of self-preservation. It was the final, necessary step in my recovery, not just from my eating disorder, but from a lifetime of emotional sabotage. I learned that sometimes the most toxic people in our lives are the ones who claim to love us the most. And true strength isn't just about overcoming your own demons, it's about having the courage to banish the people who try to convince you they're still there. My past is a part of my story, but I am the only one who gets to be the narrator. My future is a blank page, and for the first time, I get to write it myself.